What's up, expats and travelers alike? It's Josh with Expats Everywhere.
And I'm Kalie.
And in this video today, we are going to give you guys the 4 reasons that we traded in our lives in the US for a life in South Korea. I'm going to give you guys 2. Kalie's going to give her 2. We're going to have a little bonus stuff at the end where we talk about things that we didn't think would be important, that were important, and things that you should consider when you might want to move there.
Let's go. My first reason is I had never been to Asia, and even though my family traveled a lot when I was younger, we had done more in like Europe, Latin America, those places. So I had never been to Asia, and I actually remember a friend in high school went to Japan for a visit, and I thought, wow, that is so cool. So to me, Asia was still kind of mysterious because I had never visited and I didn't know much about it. And it also seemed very safe, so that's why it was like, this might be a good place to go.
And for me as well, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I've never been, very intriguing, but we had 3 places that we wanted to go to in Asia that we had kind of narrowed down our short list. 1, Malaysia, 2, Japan, and 3, South Korea. Now, at the time, what was going on with Japan, we had the Fukuoka nuclear disaster situation going on, and also the tsunami that hit there. So this was several years back, and that wasn't good. So there was just some things there that kind of put us off about going. You know, in retrospect, it probably would have been fine for us to move there.
Sure, yeah, I don't think it would have been that bad, but we weren't really sure, obviously being so far away and
exactly.
all those issues going on.
Exactly. It's the same with like when you're living in South Korea and you have the noisy neighbors to the north that are doing things. It seems worse in the media than it actually is. We'll get to that later. Malaysia was going to be a difficult place just because Kalie had 0 work experience in teaching, and that's what we were going to go there to do. So that was kind of not really an option. But for starting out teaching, South Korea is one of the best places in the world. It's really easy to get a job there. Not saying they're the best jobs in the world, but it's easy to get a job. It's easy to get your start there. So that was my number 1 reason.
And a lot of people do go there just to get their start or to kind of get a taste of living abroad, teaching, and then maybe go back to their home country.
So that actually segues into my next reason. So reason number 3 is that there had been other people that went there before us that we knew or that we had connections to, so it didn't seem so crazy. We didn't really know anybody that had moved really anywhere else in Asia but South Korea. We didn't know anyone that had been to Japan. We didn't know anyone that had been to Malaysia or Singapore or
right, yeah, I think
China even. Yeah.
I think that there were a lot more people who had gone to South Korea, like you said, before us, so it seemed a little safer in a way, I guess.
Yeah, safer, not just like personal safety, but the ability to get there, get around, survive. Yeah.
So then my next reason is that it gave us a completely different base for travel. So obviously before this we had lived in Spain and we had done a lot of travel within Europe. So we said, let's go to Asia because we hadn't seen any of those countries out there, and we thought South Korea would be a very good base for different places like Japan or China, even the Philippines and those areas that maybe are a little further away, but obviously closer if you're in Korea than if you were in somewhere in Europe or the US or something like that.
Yeah, it's starting to be a theme where we're driven by travel and making a base somewhere and then traveling elsewhere, because that is really a great way to be an expat and live the expat life and get around and see a lot of interesting places. Now, bonus material. Let's get to the bonus material where we talk about the interesting things that we found moving there that should have been reasons to go there, and then some things that you need to know before you go.
Okay, so I think my first one is safety. I mean, we had kind of heard that it was a safe country and you can, I guess, check different lists and stuff, but when you're actually there, it feels extremely safe. You can walk around at night without any problems. You don't have to feel like you have to be aware of your surroundings or anything like that. I mean, obviously you probably should, but you don't really have to. I think the Korean people are very nice and you just don't get that sense of tension when you walk around either daytime or nighttime. So it just feels very safe all around, no matter where you are. If you're walking by yourself or you're with a group, or maybe if you even have like money hanging out of your pocket, you don't have to worry about someone pickpocketing or anything. It's just not their culture to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the money might fall out of your pocket and you're gonna have some Korean that will chase you down to hand it back. They might not know English, but you're gonna get a lot of smiles, giggles, and and these. Okay, so talking about safety, what about North Korea? Like,
Right.
Isn't that dangerous?
Well, so the funny thing is when you're there, you hear all these things about like the crazy stuff going on, but day-to-day life feels completely normal. Like, it just doesn't feel like there's anything happening. I guess there's always that possible threat, but maybe because it's just this ongoing threat that hasn't gone away in a long time, the Koreans there are just kind of like, they're not going to do anything. They haven't been really doing much, so it's just kind of like people live their day-to-day lives.
And most of the South Koreans that we knew were very much into reunification. They were supporters of reunification, so that's interesting. I think really South Korea's enemy is Japan.
Oh yeah,
Right? That's their
because
big
of their
rival.
history.
Yeah,
I guess
that's
because
their
of their past. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing to note, because you might go there and you're going to think, they're really going to have a lot of animosity towards North Koreans, when it's actually some interesting cultural dynamics between the Japanese.
Right, and even though a lot of this was in the past, a long time ago, it's being passed down by generation to generation about what happened. So you'll even have like children who will talk about certain things, and you're like, how do you even know that?
Yeah.
Like, that was so long ago. Don't worry about that. But it's because their parents or grandparents are telling them. So there is that kind of a weird rivalry, I guess.
Yeah, okay, so the next thing that is kind of a hidden benefit that we didn't realize is the savings rate in South Korea is huge. Now, you're probably going to look at your job offers and think like, this isn't very much money compared to maybe the US or some other country that you could go to, but the savings rate is ridiculous in South Korea.
Right, yeah. I mean, food is cheap, whether you're at the grocery store or you just pop into a restaurant, bakeries, all that stuff is quite cheap. So, yeah, like Josh said, even if it doesn't look like you're making too much, generally you have a package as well. So, like, housing will be paid for. You get a housing stipend, so obviously that helps. Bills aren't much. So, yes, it is a lot of savings.
Okay, some things that we probably need to warn you about. If you're not moving to Seoul, and even if you're going to Seoul to some extent, Korea is very homogenous. There are a lot of things that are in Korean, so learning a bit of Korean will be super helpful. It'll make things not seem so foreign, but at first, if you don't know Korean, it's going to be culture shock.
Yeah, it's really tough. And even if you think you know some Korean, they might not understand you. I had that problem with where we lived. I had memorized how to say where we live for taxis, but I'd get in there and they would have no idea what I was saying. So finally I had a colleague write in Korean for me where our place was. So I would just give that little thing that I had in my wallet to them. And they'd say it, and when they would say it, I would hear it and I'd be like, that's what I said. Like, that sounds like what I said. But yeah, so you might know some, which is good. Definitely practice, but don't get discouraged if it sounds like it's not working, I guess, because there are some that might have a difficult time with your pronunciation.
Yeah, and back to the homogeneous nature of Korea, it can be a bit, I don't want to say boring, that's a bad word. I don't really know what word to use for it, but it can be a bit boring. I'm just going to use that word. Because there's a lack of variety, I think. There's not a big international cultural scene outside of Seoul. And even in Seoul, we didn't live in Seoul, we lived in Busan, but even in Seoul, I could imagine that people might get a bit bored of what is actually available there as far as the cultural stuff.
Yeah, but I would say to combat that, since it's all very, very new, you still have like years of exploring new things.
That's true.
So it will be, maybe there's not a variety, but since they have a lot of their own, you can spend a long time exploring that. So for example, like the karaoke, like you can go to karaoke rooms, and this is not something that's, obviously karaoke is common in the US, but you're in an open area. There they have you rent out your private little room and you eat and drink and sing karaoke with your friends. And so stuff like that is totally new, and I think you can spend a lot of time doing those types of things. So maybe eventually it gets boring, which is kind of where we were after about 2 years.
Yeah. All right, so let's compare Korea travel, like getting outside of Korea, to, let's say, Southeast Asia and Europe. It's more expensive. You need to recognize that anytime you want to fly off of the Korean peninsula, it's more expensive. So making big vacations and holiday plans, it's a little more difficult. Certainly geographically, it's not as well located as a Singapore, for example. So that needs to be taken into consideration.
I think their budget airlines are getting a little better, but when we were there, that still wasn't a big thing. So it was hard to find cheap flights to different places on budget airlines. That is getting better though.
It's getting better.
So last thing that I think you need to consider is, even though there are a lot of expats in South Korea, in the big cities and even in some of the smaller towns, you will get stared at. And it can be kind of annoying. Like, we lived in Busan, which is the second largest city in South Korea. However, daily we would get stared at. Even though we would see expats daily, we would see Westerners daily, so it didn't seem very weird to see other people that weren't Korean, but there would still be people that would stop and stare. And when I say stare, it's not like trying to be, you know, nonchalant about it. It's like, yeah, like stop their walking and just track you as you walk. And so some people take it like, I'm a celebrity, sure, but other people it's like, why? Why are you looking at me like that? And then you would get into this, like, you could stop and do the same thing to them, but then it would be like this awkward staring contest, which is not cultural for us, but for them it's fine just to like stare at you like that. But for Westerners, you would try and be like, well, I'm just gonna stare back. Well, you're gonna lose.
I didn't do that. I went the rock star method. I was just like, I am a rock star. They think I am Tom Cruise.
That's who they thought Josh looked like.
Yeah.
But
Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt.
Yeah, so I would say some of those little cultural things, well, they'll like stare at you, where the older ladies, they're called ajamas, like you better get out of their way because they own everything. So if you're walking down the sidewalk, you move for them. If they want to save a spot on the metro, they're gonna throw their purse there even though they're 10 feet away, and that's
if
their
their purse
spot.
is there, that's their spot.
Yeah.
They've claimed it. They have claimed it.
So the elderly thing as well is something that you have to get used to.
Yeah, if you guys are interested in learning more about South Korea, we've actually done several videos on South Korea, so click this playlist here. And we'd love to have you guys as subscribers, so hit the subscribe button and learn more about expat life and Josh and Kalie.
Bye!
See ya.